Welcome back, people. You already know it's me, Bryce from Develop Mindfully, and let's continue writing our CSV to map web app. Try saying that 5 times fast. So just to quickly summarize where we left things off last time, we installed a bunch of dev tools, put together a nice Webpack configuration, and created the base style sheet, HTML file, and our index.js. That will be bundled together to get us started. So without dancing around it any longer, let's actually build a thing. So what we have to do next is put together our layout. So we're going to keep it fairly simple since we're following kind of a single page app approach where we'll just be mainly showing and hiding sections as needed, even though we have one HTML file. And we want to be able to see our web app live reloading as we write the code. So let's start our Webpack dev server using our npm script that we defined here. So I'm just going to run npm run dev. That's going to get started and should open a new tab in our browser here. Alright, there we go. So in our HTML file, you know what, actually let's remove this first. In our index.js file, I'm just going to remove that hello world alert. See, I'm going to save, it's going to be recompiling, it'll reload nicely for us over here. And if I move back to our index.html file, I'm going to remove this h1 tag, and I'm going to start with a common Bootstrap element here, a container fluid div, and this will be our full width layout component. And to save time, I'm going to paste each section into this container, and then I'll walk through them in order. Alright, so within our the first section that we're going to have here is going to be our home section, and this is just essentially going to be a splash page for the web app. And then we're going to follow that up with a import data section. And this, as the name implies, will feature a file input which will allow the user to pick a CSV file on their computer and be read into the browser's web storage. And the next is the select fields section. So this one I kind of glossed over in the first part, but what this will essentially be is a form that will allow the user to pick what fields should be used for geocoding our CSV data, as well as any other data fields to associate which location that will be displayed on the map. So if you have a column in your CSV file called street address, we want to pick that for the address, and so on and so forth, city, state, country, all those common fields that are required for the geocoding process. And then next, finally, we have the plan route section. So this will actually feature our map embedded in the page. And it will also be like an interface for viewing the data at each location, and will control whether the user wants to save the map data or export a PDF report with directions. And as I mentioned before, we'll be simulating different pages in this app by showing and hiding these sections as we navigate back and forth between them. So let's get started with our home section. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. So what we have here, I'm just going to also save that just so we can see what we got here. Nice. Yeah, so just walking through the different parts here. So we wrap the section in a Jumbotron, which is Bootstrap's component for like a big call to action header, which is kind of the entire portion that we see here. And it's also sometimes called a hero section. And we display the title provided by that HTML Webpack plugin option. So it'll be the same title that we feature in our config over here. So that gets displayed in a big header, followed by just a paragraph here to kind of give some instructions on what's going on, a horizontal rule to separate that lower portion from here, and just a little instruction underneath the horizontal rule wrapped in a paragraph that just says when you're ready, click the button below to continue, and finally a button at the bottom which we will click to get started, which will move us to the next section. So next in our import data section, I'm going to paste in the rest of the code here. So same thing as before, we have our section wrapped in this Jumbotron element. We have another h1 tag to give the title. And within here, we're going to have a, oh, I just realized I'm not showing it to you, so here we go. I'm just going to refresh there. Perfect. So within there, we have another row element here, kind of to split into a 2-column layout, which will feature 2 different input fields that we'll fill in shortly. And then we have another horizontal rule, followed by a paragraph with instructions, and another button to proceed. This is our import button. So in this first column, the left half, if you will, we're going to fill in with this code here. And again, don't worry about necessarily typing this all from the video. I'll have links to the GitHub repo if you want to copy it from there, but if you want to type it yourself, feel free as well. So we just have a paragraph here explaining what to do, and within there we have a file input in this kind of Bootstrap-esque way of doing it, but essentially it boils down to a file type input with accepting only a CSV type file, also marking that it's required, as well as a label associated with that. And then in the second column, we're going to add another paragraph with instructions and another input field, this time for a JSON file. So we'll circle back to this a little bit later, but essentially what this will be used for will be importing a map directly into this app instead of going through the whole process of importing a CSV, parsing the data, and then having the geocode process plot the markers on the map. Instead, we want to have this second feature available here if we want to just get right back to our map. So we'll explain that later again, but we'll just fill in the HTML code just for now. And as I mentioned, same sort of structure, this time just accepting the application/JSON MIME type instead. And yeah, there we go. So next we move on to our select fields section, which has the same basic structure. I'm just going to make a little bit more room here. Alright, so what do we have going on here? So, same basic structure as before. We have the Jumbotron, a heading, some basic instructions to start, and this time we have a form wrapped around. Now this form will feature 5 different drop downs and a more dynamic section below, which will let you pick the fields that will be used in the geocoding process. Again, so those major components of an address, such as address, city, state, country, postal code. And so we're going to go through and fill each one of those in one by one. I should also mention this bottom portion here below. It's something a little different as well. So in here we have a span tag that also features, it'll be like a quick file summary to show kind of how many rows are present in the file, and which kind of represents how many locations you want to import into your map. And we also have this progress bar component that will be updated, and we'll be able to see it kind of moving across the screen as the geocoding process takes place and we hit that Google Maps Geocoding API. And also we have these 2 buttons down here to kind of go to back to the previous step, or to plot our locations directly on our map, which will start the geocoding process. Easy enough. So now let's add the rest of those fields as I mentioned, and we will be able to see them updating live as we add them. So again, we need to work with full addresses here. So we're going to assume that the data in the CSV file is broken down into the parts of the address that we'll need. But the thing is, they might have different names depending on the column names you gave in the file. So just to look at an example of this, I'm going to copy and paste some sample files into our repo here. So I'm just going to make a new folder called sample. Sorry, we want that to be at the top level. And I'm just going to paste a couple of test files in there for us. Here we go. So this is just an example of, this is kind of an example of what I mean. So we could have column names here that we can't predict, basically, right? Depending on the data that you're importing. We have no idea. They could have names in a different language, different format than we would expect, and we want our app to be able to handle those unpredictable elements. So that's kind of the entire portion of these drop downs. So we can select, okay, address refers to the street address, city refers to the city, so on and so forth. And that means that we could give this whatever different kind of column name that we want, and we would still be covered without issue. So that's an example of what I'm talking about there. So let's fill in these drop downs. So getting started with street address, we're going to have this sort of form group structure here. So there's a row, and if we save this to see what that looks like, in the row we're going to have basically the address, the label displayed here next to the field, and then this will eventually be populated with the possible names. And aside from the select element itself, we also have a invalid message, feedback message that'll be put here if there's if the input is skipped by the user or any other situation where it's problematic. Moving on to the city field, so just going to paste that in there. Again, same sort of thing, nothing really different to note here, just a different input for city. And I'm going to repeat this once again for province or state, and once again for the postal code or zip code, and finally for country. Great, so if we just scroll down a little bit over here, we can see this is what we were trying to go for. And again, you'll notice there's no options in these select inputs, and we've done this on purpose because they'll be populated later through JavaScript after we've imported our CSV file, and we can look at, we can pull these headings basically and supply them here, and we'll do some interesting things to make it dynamic so that if you pick the address field, it will disappear from the list in the city, and so on and so forth. So you can basically match those fields appropriately. So similarly, we're going to add a last form group down here with a placeholder element where we'll basically be appending a bunch of checkboxes, and these checkboxes will have optional fields that are not used for geocoding but can be included as basically data related to the location. So if this was a if the theme of the locations we were trying to plot on our map were, say, restaurants, we could put like the name of the restaurant, maybe the type of food that they serve. Those would be some different data type fields that we could add. Again, purely optional, it's kind of just for fun. So the difference is here we're kind of wrapping our form group is made up of a field set element, and we have basically a container here that will use later to append all of those different checkboxes, again once we find out which fields are data related in our CSV file that we import. Alright, so we have those first three sections taken care of, and our last is the main interface with the map down in our plan route section. So I'm just going to paste that in. Now just going to drag this over a little bit, give us a bit more space. So we have a bit of a different layout here again. So we have a row, and we have kind of a 2-column setup. One side is going to show our map, and then on the other side we're going to have a table essentially that will show some of our data for our route. We have our paragraph description for the actions to be taken next here once again. And we also have this important div with an ID of map, which we'll be using with the Google Maps API shortly. And finally, we also have another nested row element here. So this is going to appear below the map, and we'll fill that in a second here. You'll see we have kind of a two-column approach again. So there's going to be kind of an area where we show, just like this, we kind of can, what these will do is when you hover over a marker on the map, they will show kind of data related to the location, and then some of those data fields attached to the location as well over here. So it's kind of just to give us a quick preview of what we're hovering over with our mouse. And then finally, in the next column, this is going to hold our table element that I referred to earlier, and this is going to hold the location stops on our route as we kind of click different markers and create that stop-by-stop route using the Directions API, and this will basically list them out for us in this table here. So I know that looks like it looks like quite a bit right now, but we'll be able to circle back to it as we begin kind of adding the features and implementing them. So we also have our actions at the bottom here, and these feature the abilities to export the PDF report, again, which we will do in JavaScript, so nothing to touch there for now, and also export the JSON data. And again, this is the feature I was referring to earlier, where once our map, which we don't see yet, but it'll be populated here, if we want to save kind of its state, and rather than go through this whole process again, we can get right back to our map with our route and all of the saved data already loaded up for us. So we can use this button here to kind of export that data and move on. So perfect, we're almost done editing our HTML template. The last thing we need to do is basically just hide every section except for our first home section. So I'm just going to go to the section element for each of these. I'm just going to zoom in once just to make sure you can see. So I'm just going to add a style equals display none to each of these sections. Scrolling up to the select field section, going to add one there as well. And our import section. So now all we're left with after saving and reloading is back where we started here. And we also have a few styles we want to apply as well. So if we go back to our style sheet, style.css, I need to add some styles for our map as well as a couple other portions of the interface. So I'm just going to copy and paste these in. So we have our main map element. A very important part of the Google Maps API is you always have to define kind of the width and height beforehand. And then we have some other classes here for our map button. These are buttons that will be displaying over top of the map, which will let us do things like reset the directions. We'll get into that later, but just to get it out of the way now, we won't be doing a ton of styling here since Bootstrap is taking care of a lot of that for us. So I just thought we'd get it out of the way at the beginning. And then finally, we just have another rule here for the font size within our table that appears next to our map, which will show the different stops along the way. So yeah, thanks for joining me. This wraps up our HTML template, and we're ready to move on to the JavaScript portion of the tutorial where we actually get to dig in, get our hands dirty, and write our app's logic. So thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying this tutorial, please support the video by clicking like and also subscribe to Develop Mindfully if you'd like to see more, and we'll see you in the next one.